Hello. Today is Saturday of the third week of Advent, and we're working our way through Ishtar's Odyssey. The three candles are lit in the Advent wreath, and today's chapter is titled Tabitha's Travels. "My friend," the man in the dirty tunic said, "can I interest you in a bit of baklava?" Jotham looked at Ishtar, who then looked at the pastry the man held out. Ishtar gave a slight shake of his head, and Jotham said, "No, thank you." They pushed on through the crowd, trying to look into every crack and alley for a sign of Jotham's father. "You are missing a rare delicacy," the man in the dirty tunic yelled after them. The two boys ignored him, knowing the unwritten rules of haggling did not require them to respond. Jerusalem didn't seem so beautiful now that Ishtar was in it. The air was foul with the stench of manure and sweat, and red-faced men pulled camels and goats and donkeys through the narrow, winding streets. There were shops everywhere, and you could buy anything, but it wasn't the wide boulevards and organized markets of Amaranth. Ishtar kept looking around nervously. Never in his life had he been away from Kazim or some other bodyguard for more than a few minutes, yet here he was, alone in a big city. He kept telling himself that no one knew who he was, and he was dressed in an ordinary tunic, but still. "What is baklava?" Jotham asked. "It is a sweet and flaky pastry that is full of honey and nuts. It is the best of my people." "So why didn't we get some?" "Because that which the man offered was camel dung compared to real baklava. Besides," he said as he continued to watch faces go by, "we have no money." They continued searching. Ishtar could only guess at what Jotham's family looked like, of course, but 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. "Is that him?" Ishtar asked, pointing to a middle-aged man with a beard. Jotham looked and then sighed as he said, "No, but it is a very close likeness." Simeon was searching another part of the city. With only a description of Jotham's family, it would be difficult, but Jotham had said that if his family was to be found, Simeon could find them. The two boys had enjoyed their time with Simeon. They had talked late into the night about the Messiah. Simeon kept saying, "You are sure that Ishtar's father follows a rising star?" Then a few minutes later he would say, "Are you sure that Nathan said the time is close?" Jotham and Ishtar would nod their heads rapidly each time and say, "Yes, yes, most assuredly." "Ishtar, look!" Ishtar raised his head to look where Jotham was pointing. Over the top of the city wall, they could see a huge caravan descending from the wilderness of Judea to the Kidron Valley. "It's my father!" Ishtar yelled. Together the boys ran out the lion's gate in the city wall and met up with the caravan just as it reached the bottom of the valley. "Father!" Ishtar cried when he saw him. The two hugged for a long time, and then Ishtar hugged Kazim and Varta, and anyone else that would let him. He had much explaining and apologizing to do. "It was as if you were born again," Salamar said, "when the servant of Simeon rode to our camp and told me you were alive." He told how the entire caravan, even the women, had spent the day searching every rock and bush in the desert, and how he had sent for Nathan to help. Salamar took Ishtar by the shoulders and stood him up straight, staring at him in the eye. "What's wrong, father?" Ishtar asked. "Kazim may call me mad," Salamar said, "but I would swear by the gods that you've grown half a cubit since we left home." "It is true," Varta said. "I've had to lengthen his trousers twice on this journey." Just then Simeon walked up, and Jotham introduced him. "I am in your debt," Salamar told him, "for caring for my son. May your God favor you richly for your kindness." Simeon reported finding no trace of Jotham's family, and then Salamar said, Jotham, you are welcome to stay with our caravan if you would like. We will camp here tonight. Your King Herod heard my men were asking questions and sent word demanding we go and speak with him. Jotham asked if Ishtar could help him search the city some more. No, that will not be possible, Salamar said. His place is at my side as I visit your king. After Jotham had left to continue his search, Salamar hugged Ishtar again. You scared me, my son. You must never run off and leave your bodyguard like that. Again. Yes, father. No, father. It just kind of happened. Such things happen with boys. But you have greater responsibility than most, and the most important of your responsibilities is to stay alive. Salamar said this with a smile, to show he was not angry. Now we must dress to visit Herod. You'll find new clothes waiting in your tent. Some time later, after Ishtar had washed and changed into his new trousers and tunic, green and black with gold braid, he headed back to his father's tent. Salamar, Jodhpur, and Bozan were all in new clothes as well, and all wore turbans on their heads with red stones set in the centers. Even Kazim had a rich new tunic, and Ishtar was sure he had polished his sword. 12 servants gathered, carrying rolls of silk and many other rare gifts, but not the gold, frankincense, or myrrh. Come now, Salamar said to the group. The time of our appointment is near. Suddenly Jotham appeared, out of breath. A prophetess, he gasped. A prophetess has told me I will find my family in a place called Bethlehem. I must go and tell Simeon, and we will leave at once. You're leaving? Ishtar asked. I must, my friend, but God be willing, we will soon meet again. Jotham ran off in the direction of Simeon's house, and Ishtar sighed a heavy sigh. I seem to lose friends faster than I make them, he said to Kazim. They entered Jerusalem through what was called the Sheep Gate. It was right next to the Roman fortress of Antonio, and it made Ishtar nervous to be so close to the many Roman soldiers standing guard in red and gold uniforms, holding spears and shields. Halt! The command was in Latin, and sounded like it came from the general of some great army, Ishtar decided. He saw he was exactly right. Marching toward them in red robes and armor was a Roman so large he could be a tree. His face was mean and looked like a rat. A centurion, Ishtar guessed. State your business in Jerusalem, the officer ordered. We have an appointment with King Herod, Salamar answered. The guard began to argue with Salamar, saying something about Jews dressed up in costume are still Jews, but Ishtar stopped listening. Instead, he was watching a young Jewish girl about his age. She was kneeling on the stone steps that led high up to the tall bronze doors of the fortress, and she was caring for an injured Roman soldier. What he noticed most was that she had ripped a sleeve from her tunic to use as a bandage. Before he could think another thought, Ishtar saw one of the other soldiers raise his spear and aim it at the girl. Ishtar began to form the thought that he should do something when an old man nearby knocked the spear out of the soldier's hand. There was a lot of commotion, but everything stopped when a tall Roman in a cape of red and gold, standing with his hands on his hips on a step higher than the others, yelled, "Hold!" There was much talk between them all, during which the first soldier lowered his lance, and others let go of the old man and got back in formation. Finally, the tall Roman stood back from where he'd been talking to the girl. Ishtar saw her run down the steps and grab the hand of the old man, and heard the old man yell, "Tabitha, where are we going?" He couldn't hear the reply, but saw them running toward the sheep gate. "A Persian?" yelled the Roman talking to Salamar. A funny look swept across the soldier's face, and Ishtar couldn't decide if it was disgust or fear. "I want no trouble with Persians," he said. "Then we will be on our way," Shalimar said. Ishtar smiled. Ever since Mark Antony was humiliated by the Persians in battle, the Romans had made an extra effort to avoid conflicts with Persian warriors. Shalimar and the rest headed up the street toward Herod's palace again, but Ishtar's thoughts were on that girl. Not only did she look like someone who could be his friend, she had shown no fear, even against a Roman 5 times her size. How could such a young girl have such bravery in the face of such a powerful enemy, he wondered. People all through the city stopped and stared as the small procession wound its way from the lower city to the upper city where rich people and rulers lived. It was much cleaner and less crowded up here, Ishtar saw, and the streets were more like those in Amaranth. Suddenly they found themselves in a large courtyard surrounded on 3 sides by covered walkways and filled in the center with gardens and trees. They crossed through the cool of the gardens to the other side, where a tall archway led through a wall and into Herod's compound. Now this is more like it, Ishtar thought. They entered another garden, one with pools and canals and waterfalls amidst palm trees and grassy terraces and all kinds of plants. There were statues of bronze and flocks of tame doves. Marble columns held up the roof of a covered walkway that extended all around the rectangular garden. At either end, on the short sides of the rectangle, identical palaces soared into the air. Most impressive, though, were the 3 towers Ishtar saw to his right. They formed a sort of triangle, and each was different, though they were all built of huge blocks of marble with differing levels of columns and terraces. So perfectly were they built that Ishtar could hardly tell where one block of marble stopped and another started. "Prepare your mind," Shalimar whispered to Ishtar. "Jewish priests and officials speak in Hebrew only." In the last hour, Ishtar realized he'd had to speak in Aramaic, in Latin, and now Hebrew. "This is just like home," he thought. A servant in robes of golden cloth met them and led them toward those 3 towers, and then through more tall columns into the palace at the right end of the gardens. It all felt very familiar to Ishtar, and he thought sadly about how long he'd been gone from home. They passed pools and hallways and side rooms full of trees and flowers, and then entered what Ishtar instantly identified as the throne room. And there, upon a marble throne, sat a man that Ishtar thought surely must be as mad as a thirsty camel, and looked just as mangy. Why do the Romans hate the Persians so much? Why do the Persians hate the Romans? Why are Shalimar and his brothers treated so poorly by the centurion? We humans like to judge others who aren't like us so we can feel superior. We think that because we were born in a certain place, or belong to a certain religion, or have certain physical features, that somehow we're special, better. Maybe we should keep this in mind. Unless we're Jewish and were born and raised in Palestine, we're very different from Jesus in most every way. Would we want him to judge us on that basis? The truth is that we all have the same ancestors and come from the same family, if nothing else, as far back as Noah. So unless we're ready to disown him, there are 3 truths we should probably accept. We are all God's children. God loves every one of us exactly the same. And Jesus died for the person I hate just as much as he died for me.